They laughed. When I started my business at 75, now they're begging for jobs at my company. You ever have a moment when the people you love most look right through you, as if you were just another piece of worn-out furniture in the corner? My name is Margaret Walker, and for 60 years I gave my heart, my money, my everything to my family, only to be laughed at when I decided to chase a dream of my own. If you've ever felt invisible in your own home, or heard the sound of your own voice drowned out by the ones you raised, then you're in the right place. Before we dive deep, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? And if this story touches you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more tales of courage and second chances. Now, let me take you on a journey of betrayal, awakening, and the fight to reclaim my dignity. Margaret, can you grab me another beer? Harold called from his recliner, not bothering to look up from the television. Coming, dear, I replied, setting down the bills I'd been organizing. Bills he hadn't bothered to look at in years. The phone rang just as I opened the refrigerator. Mom, it's Linda. I need you to watch the kids tomorrow. I have a meeting. But tomorrow is my garden club. Mom, this is important. It's for work. You can skip your little flower thing just once. The dismissive tone in her voice made my stomach tighten. Of course, I said, swallowing my disappointment. What time should I? Great. I'll drop them at 8. Gotta run. The line went dead. I carried Harold's beer to him, watching as he took it without a word of thanks. 75 years old, and I was still waiting for someone to say thank you. Your beer, Harold. He grunted, eyes glued to the game. I spoke to Linda. She needs me to watch the kids tomorrow. That's nice, he mumbled, clearly not listening. The doorbell rang. Thomas and his wife, Denise, early for dinner. I wiped my hands on my apron and plastered on a smile. Mom, we need to talk about money, Thomas announced, walking straight past me into the living room. Hello to you, too, I said, hoping the sarcasm would register. It didn't. Denise at least had the grace to look embarrassed. Hi, Margaret. Need help? With dinner? No, I've got it, I said, returning to the kitchen while Thomas launched into conversation with his father. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Running late. Save me food. Might need to crash tonight. Love you. I sighed, adding another plate to the table. Sarah, my baby at 43, still crashing at our house whenever her rent money ran short. Dinner's ready, I called, bringing out the pot roast I'd spent hours preparing. Just a minute, Harold said, eyes never leaving the television. Thomas, can you come eat? I asked. In a second, Mom. Dad and I are talking business. I stood there, holding a heavy dish, feeling completely invisible. The phone rang again. It was Ruth, my oldest friend. Hi, Margaret. Still on for coffee tomorrow? I can't. Linda needs me to babysit. Again, Margaret. That's the 3rd time this month you've canceled. They need me, I said weakly. And what about what you need? Ruth asked. You're stronger than you know, Margaret. One day you'll see that. I hung up and called everyone to dinner, again louder this time. Grandma, can I have soda instead of water? Asked Ethan, Thomas's eldest, already reaching for the bottle. Water first, then maybe? Mom, it's fine, Thomas interrupted. Let him have what he wants. I sat down as they all helped themselves, talking over each other about their problems, their days, their lives. Not once did anyone ask about mine. I made apple pie for dessert, I said during a brief lull. Linda glanced up from her phone. Mom, you know I'm watching my carbs. I'll just have a small piece, I said. Speaking of food, Thomas interjected. "We should talk about Thanksgiving. Denise's family wants to host this year." My heart sank. Thanksgiving was my holiday, but I always... "It might be nice to have a change," Harold said, surprising me with his betrayal. "I agree," Linda added. "Mom, you work too hard anyway." "Yeah," Sarah chimed in, appearing at last, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek before filling her plate. "Besides, I might be in Aspen with friends." I looked around the table at my family, my life's work, and realized none of them saw me. Not really. I was just... there. The glue, as Denise once called me. Invisible, but necessary. "More potatoes, Harold?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "No, I'm watching my weight," he replied, helping himself to another slice of buttered bread. I nodded and continued eating in silence, wondering when exactly I had disappeared. "Happy birthday, Sarah!" I called, carrying the chocolate cake I'd baked from scratch, her favorite since childhood. The living room was full, of family, all gathered around my youngest daughter. Sarah looked up briefly, smiled, then returned to her phone conversation. "Mom, where's the ice cream?" Linda asked, not offering to help as I struggled with the cake. "In the freezer, dear." "Thomas, get the ice cream," Linda commanded, still not moving from her comfortable position on the sofa. I set the cake down and lit the candles, my hands shaking slightly. "Can we sing already?" Harold grumbled. "The game's about to start." "Remember when Sarah turned 16 and put salt in the sugar bowl?" I said, trying to share a family memory. Linda rolled her eyes. "Mom, please, we're talking." They hadn't been talking. They'd been staring at phones. "So anyway," Linda continued, turning to Thomas, "my boss is being completely unreasonable about this project." "At least you have a steady job," Thomas interrupted. "The auto industry is terrible right now. Dad, you got out at the right time." Harold nodded sagely. "Timing is everything, son." "Speaking of timing," Sarah chimed in, finally off her phone. "I was wondering if I could borrow some money, just until my next gig pays out." "Again?" Linda snorted. "What happened to that modeling contract you were so excited about?" "It fell through," Sarah muttered defensively. "Sarah, honey," I began, "maybe we should talk about a more stable..." "Let's sing," Thomas's wife Denise announced, clearly trying to diffuse the tension. They sang half-heartedly. Sarah made a wish, and Harold immediately retreated to the television. No one had even noticed the decorations I had spent hours arranging. Later, as I cleaned up alone in the kitchen, I heard them laughing in the living room. "And then Mom tried to sell those cakes to the church fundraiser." Linda's voice carried clearly. "Remember how Pastor Jim bought one out of pity?" More laughter. My cheeks burned as I scrubbed harder at a plate. Ruth called while I was elbow-deep in dishwater. "How was the party?" she asked. "Fine," I lied, my voice tight. "Margaret Walker, I've known you since 3rd grade. That's your..." "It was terrible, but I'll never admit it, voice." I sighed. They didn't even thank me for the cake. "Why do you let them treat you like this?" "They're my family," I said automatically. "And you're a person," Ruth countered, "with dreams and feelings and..." "Mom!" Sarah called from the living room. "Where's that photo album from my graduation?" "I have to go," I told Ruth. "Think about what I said." She replied before hanging up. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone at the kitchen table with a cold cup of tea. The house felt emptier than it should have with Harold snoring upstairs. Just the way it is, I whispered to myself, but for the first time I wondered if that was true. Thanksgiving morning dawned bright and cold. Despite Denise's family originally planning to host, they'd had a plumbing emergency, so everything fell back to me, with less than a week's notice. "Mom, did you use sage in the stuffing?" Linda asked, poking her head into the steamy kitchen. "You know Ethan doesn't like sage. I made a separate batch without it," I replied, wiping sweat from my brow. I'd been cooking since 5 a.m. "Smart," she said, then disappeared without offering help. The doorbell rang, announcing more guests. Thomas had invited some friends from work, without telling me until yesterday. "Margaret, be a dear and get the door," Harold called from his recliner. I removed my apron, smoothed my hair, and welcomed 4 strangers into my home. 4 more mouths to feed with the turkey I'd barely had time to thaw. "Mrs. Walker, your house is lovely," said one young man, the only person to compliment my 3 days of cleaning. "Thank you," I replied, genuinely touched. "Dinner will be ready soon." "No rush," he said with a kind smile. Back in the kitchen, I found Sarah sampling the mashed potatoes. "Mom, these need more butter," she declared, reaching for the refrigerator. "Sarah, I've been making those potatoes for 40 years. "And they always need more butter," she teased, not maliciously, but with that dismissive air they all had. As if my experience counted for nothing, when everyone finally gathered around the table, my good china, my grandmother's tablecloth, Harold at least had the grace to stand for the blessing. "For food and family we give thanks," he said perfunctorily, then sat down while everyone began passing dishes. "Before we eat," Thomas announced, standing with a glass raised, "I have some news." The table quieted. "I'm starting my own business, a custom auto detailing shop." Cheers erupted around the table. My heart sank as Thomas continued. "I've secured the startup funds and found a location. We open in January." "That's wonderful, son," Harold beamed, following in my footsteps. "How did you get the startup money?" I asked quietly. Thomas's eyes flicked to mine, then away. "Various investors, including the $5,000 I'd loaned him 3 months ago. Money from my personal savings that he'd promised to repay within weeks. Mom wouldn't understand the business aspect." Linda laughed, turning to Thomas's colleagues. "She once tried to sell homemade cakes as a business venture." "Really?" one of them asked, looking at me. Before I could answer, Linda continued. "It was adorable. She baked like 50 cakes and took them to the farmer's market. Sold maybe 3, and those were to people from church who felt sorry for her." Everyone laughed, even Harold, even Sarah. "It was 15 years ago," I said softly, "after Harold retired." "Mom, no offense, but business requires a certain instinct," Thomas added. "Not everyone has it." I looked around the table at my family, fed by my cooking, seated in my home, laughing at my dreams, and something inside me broke. "Excuse me," I whispered, standing up. No one noticed as I walked upstairs and locked myself in the bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands trembling, and for the first time in years, I let myself cry. Really cry. An hour later, a soft knock came at the door. Margaret. It was Denise. Are you okay? I'm fine. I lied. Just a headache. Do you need anything? No, thank you. They're having dessert, she said hesitantly. Should I tell them to wait? I thought about the pumpkin pies I'd baked at midnight, the apple cobbler I'd made because it was Harold's favorite. No, I said firmly. They can serve themselves. After everyone left, Harold tapped on the bedroom door. You missed dinner, he said, as if I hadn't prepared every bite they'd eaten. I wasn't hungry. Thomas's friends thought it was odd, you disappearing like that. Not are you okay, or what happened, but concern for appearances. Harold, I said slowly, do you remember when I wanted to start that bakery business? He sighed heavily. Margaret, that was years ago. You said it was a waste of time. It was, he replied bluntly. You're not a business person. Something hardened inside me. Good night, Harold. That night I made myself a promise. I was done being invisible. It was time they learned who Margaret Walker really was. The morning after Thanksgiving I waited, until Harold left for his weekly golf game before pulling out the old cardboard box from the back of my closet. There you are, I murmured, blowing dust from my journals. Dozens of them, filled over decades with recipes, ideas, and dreams. I flipped through the pages, rediscovering the woman I used to be. Ambitious, creative, brave. The Margaret who existed before becoming simply Mom or Harold's wife. My fingers traced a page of cake designs I'd sketched 15 years ago. The phone rang. Linda, probably wanting me to take the kids again. I let it go to voicemail. Instead, I called the one person who had always seen me. Ruth, it's Margaret. Are you free for coffee today? An hour later, we sat at her kitchen table, my journals spread between us. I want to start a business, I announced. Ruth didn't laugh. She didn't remind me of my age or list reasons it wouldn't work. Instead, she smiled and said, About time. You don't think I'm crazy? I think you're finally sane, she replied, squeezing my hand. What's the plan? I took a deep breath. Baking. What I've always loved. Your lemon pound cake could end wars. Ruth agreed. I thought I'd start small. The farmer's market. Pies, cakes, specialty breads. Ruth nodded slowly. You'll need business cards, packaging, a pricing structure. I have money, I said quietly. My Aunt Mildred's inheritance. I've been investing it. Ruth's eyebrows shot up. Harold doesn't know. It wasn't much, but it's grown. I've been managing our finances for years. I learned a few things. Margaret Walker, you dark horse. Ruth laughed. What can I do to help? Deliveries, maybe? I could pay you. Partners, Ruth corrected. I'll help with deliveries. You share your recipes. I've always wanted to learn to make that strawberry shortcake of yours. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of excitement, of possibility. My phone buzzed with another call from Linda. Again, I ignored it. They're not going to like this, I said. Good, Ruth replied firmly. It's not for them to like. It's for you to love. That night, I baked 3 different cakes as test runs. When Harold came home, the kitchen was a disaster of flour and sugar. "What's all this?" he asked, frowning at the mess. "I'm baking," I replied simply. "For what? Christmas is weeks away." "For the farmer's market. I'm starting a business." Harold stared at me, then laughed, a short, dismissive sound that cut deeper than any insult. "Margaret, be serious." "I am." I met his gaze steadily. "Very serious." His smile faded. "You're too old to start something like this." "I'm 75, not dead." "And where will you get the money?" "I have money." That stopped him. "What money?" "My money," I replied, turning back to my mixing bowl. "My business." For the first time in our marriage, Harold looked at me as if seeing a stranger. He opened his mouth, closed it, then walked away without another word. I smiled to myself and kept baking. "Margaret's Magic Kitchen," Ruth read from the hastily printed banner we'd hung over my market stall. "It's perfect." I arranged the last pie on the display, nervous energy making my hands tremble. "Do you think anyone will buy them?" "They'd be fools not to," Ruth declared, adjusting her apron. I'd made matching ones for us both, pale blue with white trim. The market manager, Bob, stopped by our stall. "First-timer jitters?" he asked, kindly. "Is it that obvious?" I laughed. "You'll do fine," he assured me. "Word of advice, offer samples. Once they taste, they'll buy." I followed his suggestion, cutting small pieces of my lemon pound cake as the market opened. The first hour was slow. A few curious lookers, nothing more. Then Mrs. Peterson from church tried a sample. "Margaret Walker," she exclaimed. "You've been holding out on us at the bake sales." She bought 2 loaves and a pie, then told her friends. By noon, a small crowd had gathered. By closing time, I'd sold everything except one chocolate cake that Ruth had set aside for herself. "How much did we make?" Ruth asked as we packed up. I counted the cash box, barely believing the number. $327. "For one day?" Ruth squeezed my arm. "Margaret, that's amazing." "It's a fluke," I said, but couldn't stop smiling. "It's quality," Ruth corrected. "And we're doing it again next week." That evening, my phone rang. It was Linda. "Mom, I've been calling you for days. I need you to watch the kids tomorrow. I have a client meeting." I took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Linda, but I can't." A pause. "What do you mean, you can't?" "I'm busy with my business." She laughed. That same dismissive laugh I'd heard at Thanksgiving. "That little hobby?" "Mom, this is important." "My business is important too," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "It's just cakes," Linda said, exasperated. "It's my dream," I corrected, "and I'm pursuing it." "Since when do you have dreams?" The genuine confusion in her voice stung. "Since always, Linda. You just never asked." I hung up feeling lighter than I had in years. Thomas came by the house the next day, letting himself in without knocking as usual. "Mom?" he called, finding me in the kitchen surrounded by cooling racks of bread. "Hello, Thomas." I wiped flour from my hands. "What brings you by?" "Dad said you're doing some baking thing?" He looked around at the organized chaos of my kitchen. Looks serious. It is. That's great, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Listen, I need some help at the new shop. Just paperwork. You're so good with numbers. Before, I would have agreed instantly, rearranging my life to fit his needs. Instead, I gestured to the kitchen. As you can see, I'm quite busy. His eyebrows rose in surprise. But it's my business, Mom. It's important. So is mine, I replied simply. Thomas frowned, clearly unused to hearing no from me. I thought you'd want to help. Family first, right? Family works both ways, Thomas. When was the last time you helped me? He had no answer for that. After he left, my phone pinged with a text from Sarah. Mom, can I borrow $500? Rent emergency. We'll pay back next month. Love you. For the first time, I didn't immediately reply. Instead, I focused on my baking, on building something that was entirely mine. Is this Margaret Walker? An unfamiliar voice asked over the phone. Yes, it is, I replied, balancing the receiver while boxing a caramel apple pie. This is Janet Evans from the County Press. I'm doing a feature on local businesses and your name keeps coming up. People are raving about your baked goods. I nearly dropped the phone. My baked goods? Particularly something called your miracle lemon cake. Would you be willing to do an interview? Ruth, who was helping package orders, gave me an enthusiastic thumbs up. Yes, I'd be delighted, I stammered. 2 days later, there I was on the front page of the local section. Grandmother entrepreneur finds sweet success. The article called me an inspiration and proof that it's never too late to pursue your passion. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Old friends from church, former neighbors, even my doctor called to place an order. You're famous. Ruth laughed as we struggled to keep up with demand. Famous is a stretch, I replied, but couldn't help feeling proud. Harold watched all this with a mixture of confusion and grudging respect. He'd stopped laughing at least. The phone's for you, he said one evening, holding out the receiver. Someone about a catering order. I took it, negotiating a price for 24 cupcakes while Harold listened, eyebrows raised. You're charging that much? He asked after I hung up. That's the market rate, I replied confidently. He nodded slowly. Huh. The following Sunday was our monthly family dinner. I'd been dreading it, knowing the article would have made the rounds. Linda arrived first, her husband and children in tow. Grandma's famous! Little Olivia exclaimed, running to hug me. Not famous, sweetheart. Just busy. The newspaper says you're an inspiration, Linda remarked, her tone unreadable. I met her gaze steadily. It was a small article. Half. The moms at school mentioned it, she continued. Mrs. Hoffman asked if you were that Margaret Walker. Thomas and his family arrived next, followed by Sarah, who for once wasn't asking for money the moment she walked in. Dinner was tense. I'd had no time to cook, so we ordered pizza, another break from tradition. So, Thomas finally said, setting down his slice, this baking thing is really taking off, huh? It is, I confirmed. Anyone can bake, Linda said, dismissively. It's not exactly rocket science. Anyone can, I agreed pleasantly. But not everyone can bake well enough to sell out every weekend and have a waiting list. Sarah leaned forward. You know, Mom, I could help manage your social media. For a cut, of course. And I could help with delivery logistics, Thomas added quickly. I'm good with routing. I noticed you're still using handwritten receipts, Linda chimed in. I could set up a digital system for you. I looked around the table, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. They needed me. My success, my money, my business. But I was no longer desperate for their approval. Thank you all for the offers, I said carefully. I'll consider them. Later, as they were leaving, Denise hung back. Margaret, she said quietly, I just wanted to say, I think what you're doing is amazing. It takes real courage. Thank you, Denise, I replied, genuinely touched. I wish I had your courage, she admitted. To start over, to refuse to be invisible. I squeezed her hand, recognizing a kindred spirit. After everyone left, Harold helped me clear the pizza boxes. You didn't need to prove anything, he said gruffly. I wasn't trying to prove something to you, I replied. I was proving something to myself. He nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. That night, Ruth called with exciting news. My lemon cake had won first prize in the county fair's baking competition. The ribbon would look perfect in my new market stall. Mom, can I talk to you? Linda asked, hovering in my kitchen doorway. 6 months had passed since I'd started my business, and she rarely visited anymore. Of course, I replied, wiping flour from my hands. Is everything okay? She sat heavily at the kitchen table. No, she admitted. Nothing's okay. I waited, sensing this wasn't the time for questions. I lost my job, she finally said. 3 months ago. 3 months? I echoed, genuinely shocked. But you've been talking about work, about clients. I've been lying, she whispered, eyes filling with tears. To everyone. I go to a coffee shop during the day and pretend to work remotely. I sat down across from her. Oh, Linda. I was too embarrassed to tell anyone. Little Miss Perfect. Career, suddenly unemployed at 52. Why didn't you come to me? She laughed bitterly. And admit failure. Besides, you've been so busy with your success. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years she'd dismissed my dreams while boasting about her own career. What about the kids' tuition? I asked gently. Credit cards, she admitted. We're drowning in debt. Before I could respond, the front door opened, and Thomas walked. Mom, I need to talk to you. He stopped short, seeing Linda. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same, she retorted. I need Mom's help, he said defensively. Join the club, Linda muttered. I looked between my children. What's going on, Thomas? He sighed heavily. The business is failing. I overextended, took out loans I can't repay. The bank is threatening foreclosure. But your grand opening was just last month, I said, confused. All smoke and mirrors, he admitted. I wanted everyone to think I was successful, like Dad. As if on cue, the back door opened and Sarah slipped in. "Mom, She froze, seeing her siblings. Family meeting I didn't know about?" "Apparently," I said dryly. "What brings you here, Sarah?" She twisted her hands nervously. "I've been seeing a therapist for anxiety. It's why I keep borrowing money. I panic about everything, but I can't afford the sessions anymore." I looked at my 3 grown children, all of them hiding secrets, all of them desperate for help. "How long have you all been lying to each other? To me?" Uncomfortable. Glances were exchanged. "We didn't want to disappoint you," Thomas finally said. "Or each other," Linda added. "It's easier to pretend." "It's exhausting to pretend," I corrected. "Trust me. I know." The kitchen fell silent. "I've known you were hiding things," I continued. "A mother always knows. But I didn't know how deep it went." "Are you going to help us?" Sarah asked in a small voice. I took a deep breath. "I'm calling a family meeting. Tonight, 7 o'clock. Everyone needs to be here. Spouses, grandchildren, everyone." "Why?" Thomas asked warily. "Because it's time for the truth," I replied. "All of it." That evening, my kitchen was crowded with family. Harold sat at the head of the table looking confused. Linda's husband clutched her hand tightly. The grandchildren whispered among themselves. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "I've asked you here because it's time for honesty. No more pretending." One by one, I looked at my children. "Linda, Thomas, Sarah, you each came to me today with your secrets. Now it's time to share them with each other." Their faces paled. "Mom, I don't think—" Linda started. "I know about your job," I interrupted gently. "I know about Thomas's business failures. I know about Sarah's anxiety." Harold looked between us all, bewildered. "What's going on?" "Our perfect family isn't so perfect," I explained. "We've all been lying, some for years." Slowly, painfully, the truth emerged. Linda's unemployment, Thomas's mounting debt, Sarah's mental health struggles. Even Harold admitted he'd been hiding his own secret. A heart condition he hadn't wanted to worry anyone about. "I've been watching this family fall apart while pretending everything was fine," I said when they'd finished. "I've been your safety net, your ATM, your unpaid therapist, and your invisible housekeeper." I looked at each of them in turn. "I love you all, but I will not fix your messes anymore. Not without respect, not without honesty." The room fell silent. "What are we supposed to do?" Thomas finally asked. "Start by being honest, with yourselves and each other. Then we'll figure out the rest, together, as equals." For the first time, they really looked at me, not as Mom or Grandma, but as Margaret, a person with her own life, her own dreams. And for the first time in decades, I felt truly seen. "This is ridiculous," Linda snapped, pacing my living room the day after our family meeting. "You're abandoning us when we need you most." Thomas nodded vigorously. "Family takes care of family. That's what you always taught us." "I'm still family," I replied calmly. I'm just not your personal bank anymore. So your little cake, business is more important than your children? Linda's voice was sharp with accusation. It's not about the business, I explained. It's about respect, about seeing me as a person, not just your mother. Oh, please, Linda scoffed. You're being selfish, after everything we've done for you. What exactly have you done for me? I interrupted, surprising even myself with my directness. When was the last time any of you helped me? Asked about my dreams? Treated me with basic courtesy? Thomas looked uncomfortable. That's not fair, Mom. Isn't it? You laughed at me when I wanted to start baking. You dismissed my ideas. You took my money without repaying it. You expected me to drop everything whenever you needed help. Sarah, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. But you're our mom. That's what moms do. I'm 75 years old, Sarah. I've been mom for over 50 years. Don't I deserve to be Margaret too? They looked at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. Harold, who had been silently watching from his recliner, suddenly stood up. You've done enough, Margaret, he said, his voice firm. Let them stand on their own. 3 shocked faces turned toward him. Dad! Thomas protested. You can't be serious. Dead serious, Harold replied. Your mother has carried this family for decades. My fault as much as anyone's. I took her for granted, too. I stared at my husband, hardly believing what I was hearing. But what about my business? Thomas demanded. My children's tuition? Linda added. My therapy? Sarah chimed in. I'm not abandoning anyone, I said firmly. I'm taking care of myself first, for once. If you want my help, respect me. If you want my support, treat me like a person, not a resource. Linda's face flushed with anger. After everything we've done. Everything you've done? I repeated, quietly. What exactly is that, Linda? She opened and closed her mouth, finding no answer. I love you all, I continued. But love without respect isn't healthy, and I respect myself too much now to accept less than I deserve. Thomas stood, abruptly. This isn't over, he warned, storming out. Linda followed, pulling a tearful Sarah along. When they were gone, Harold turned to me with wonder in his eyes. 53 years of marriage, he said slowly. And I'm still learning who you are. Margaret Walker. I smiled sadly. Maybe it's time you tried. The house felt strangely peaceful after they left, as if a storm had finally broken. I knew there would be aftershocks, but for now, I could breathe. The phone rang. It was Ruth. How did it go? She asked. About as well as you'd expect, I replied. But I stood my ground. I'm proud of you, she said. It takes courage to draw boundaries, especially with family. I'm not sure courage is the word, I admitted. Desperation, maybe. I just couldn't keep disappearing anymore. That's exactly what courage is, Ruth insisted, standing up when it would be easier to stay invisible. After we hung up, I found Harold in the kitchen, awkwardly trying to make coffee. Need help? I asked. No, he replied firmly. I can learn. I watched as he fumbled with the coffee maker, refusing to give up. It was a start. For 3 weeks, silence reigned. No calls from Linda. No visits from Thomas. Not even Sarah's usual text messages begging for money. I threw myself into my business, which was growing rapidly. Ruth and I could barely keep up with orders. I hired 2 part-time assistants from the community college's culinary program. "You're a real entrepreneur now," Ruth said one afternoon as we packed boxes for delivery. "I suppose I am," I replied, still finding the word strange on my tongue. The doorbell rang late one Tuesday evening. Harold had gone to bed early, complaining of fatigue from his heart condition. I opened the door to find Linda standing there, eyes red-rimmed. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. "Of course," I said, stepping aside. She sat at the kitchen table, looking smaller somehow. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began. I waited, giving her space to continue. "I'm scared, Mom," she finally admitted. "I had this image of myself, successful career woman, perfect mother, but it was all smoke and mirrors." Her voice cracked. "And when I saw you actually succeeding, actually living your dream, I was jealous." "Jealous? Of me?" The idea seemed absurd. "You're 75 and starting over," she said. "Meanwhile, I'm 52 and terrified of change." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Starting over is terrifying at any age." "I've been awful to you," she whispered. "For years." "Yes," I agreed simply. "You have." She flinched but nodded. "I deserve that, but I want to do better." We talked for hours that night. Really talked. Perhaps for the first time since she was a teenager. She told me about her fears, her failing marriage, her sense that she'd lost herself somewhere along the way. "I don't know who I am without my job," she confessed. "I understand," I said. "For years I didn't know who I was outside of being your mother." She looked at me with new eyes. "How did you find yourself again?" "One cake at a time," I smiled, "and by remembering who I was before becoming Mom." When she left that night, something had shifted between us. Not healed, not yet, but beginning to mend. Thomas came next, a week later. Unlike Linda, he was combative at first. "So, is this about proving something?" he demanded, pacing my kitchen. "Some kind of payback?" "This isn't about you at all, Thomas," I replied calmly. "Really? Because it feels like you're punishing us." "Is standing up for myself punishment?" I asked. He had no answer for that. After his initial anger faded, Thomas admitted what I'd suspected. His business was failing completely. He'd taken loans he couldn't repay, made promises to clients he couldn't keep. "Dad made it look so easy," he said, shoulders slumped. "The auto shop, supporting a family. I wanted to make him proud." "Your father worked 16-hour days for years," I reminded him gently. "And he had me handling the books, the taxes, the paperwork, all unpaid." Thomas looked genuinely surprised. "I never knew that." "No one asked," I replied simply. After a long pause, Thomas asked, Would you consider taking me on? At your bakery?" I could handle deliveries, customer service. I'm good with people. I studied my son's face. This isn't a handout, Thomas. It would be a real job, with real expectations. I understand, he said, and for once I believed him. On a trial basis, I agreed. Minimum wage to start, and you'll report to me as your boss, not your mother. He nodded, looking both relieved and apprehensive. Sarah was the hardest. She, avoided me for nearly 2 months, though I heard from Ruth that she'd been asking questions about me. When she finally appeared, it was early morning. I was preparing dough for the day's baking when I heard a soft knock. Sarah stood on the porch, looking thinner than I remembered. "Hi, Mom," she said tentatively. "Hello, Sarah," I replied, letting her in. Unlike her siblings, Sarah didn't start with apologies or explanations. Instead, she asked, "How did you know you wanted to bake?" The question surprised me. I've always loved creating things that bring joy to others, I said after a moment's thought. But I think I was afraid to admit how much I wanted it. She nodded slowly. "I've been seeing someone," she said. "A therapist." "That's good," I replied. "She says I have anxiety, that it's why I keep running from things, why I'm always short on money." Sarah looked down at her hands. "She said I've been using you as a safety net. Have you?" I asked gently. "Yes," Sarah admitted, "and it wasn't fair to either of us." We sat in silence for a moment, the smell of rising dough filling the kitchen. "I don't know what I want to do with my life," she confessed, "but I'm trying to figure it out. I got a part-time job at the bookstore." "That's a start," I encouraged. "I was wondering," she began hesitantly, "if you could use help with deliveries sometimes. Just part-time. I'd understand if you'd rather not." I studied my youngest daughter, still fragile but trying. "Saturday mornings," I said, "but only if you continue with therapy." "Deal," she agreed, a small smile breaking through. Even Harold was changing. One morning I came downstairs to find him attempting to make breakfast. "You don't have to do that," I said, surprised to see him at the stove. "Yes, I do," he replied gruffly. "You've been carrying too much, for too long." The eggs were rubbery, the toast burnt, but it was the best breakfast I'd had in years. Slowly, painfully, our family was healing, not back to what it was. I wouldn't allow that, but forward to something new. Something healthier. Ruth watched it all with quiet pride. "You're teaching them to stand on their own," she told me one day. "That's love too, Margaret." I nodded, finally understanding that sometimes the kindest thing we can do for those we love is to stop catching them when they fall, and instead teach them how to rise. 1 year after I sold my first cake at the farmer's market, we celebrated the grand opening of Margaret's Magic Kitchen, a small bakery in a renovated storefront downtown. The space wasn't large, but it was mine, bought with profits from my business, not with Harold's money or family loans. The walls were painted a warm yellow, with recipes framed like artwork. Display cases gleamed with pies, cakes, and pastries. A small seating area invited customers to linger. "It's beautiful, Mom," Linda said, standing beside me as I cut the ribbon. She now helped with the website and marketing, finding her stride again after months of struggle. Thomas, who had proven himself reliable, managed our growing delivery service. "We've got orders backed up for 2 weeks," he reported proudly. Sarah, still working part-time, had discovered a talent for decorating. Her delicate sugar flowers topped our most expensive cakes. "The wedding orders are my favorite," she admitted. Even Harold had found his place, keeping the books with the same meticulous attention he'd once given his auto shop. "Grandma's famous," little Olivia announced, skipping in circles around the store. "My teacher ordered a cake from you." I laughed, enjoying her enthusiasm. Ruth stood by the door, greeting customers with warm smiles. "I told you," she whispered, when we had a moment alone. "I always knew you had this in you." The bell above, the door jingled, and Janet Evans from the county press walked in. "The county's favorite baker," she said, grinning. "Mind if I do a follow-up story?" Local grandmother's business success was our most popular feature last year. "Of course," I agreed, no longer intimidated by attention. "What's your secret?" Janet asked, notebook poised. Not many people start successful businesses in their 70s. I thought for a moment. "It's never too late to remember who you are," I said finally. "And it's never too late to demand respect." That evening, after the celebration, after the customers had gone and the family had returned to their homes, Harold and I sat in the bakery's small office. "I'm proud of you, Margaret," he said quietly. "I should have said that years ago." "Thank you," I replied, the words still new and precious between us. "I was thinking," he continued hesitantly, "maybe we could take a trip. That cruise you always wanted. We can afford it now, with the bakery doing so well." I studied my husband's face, older now, softer somehow. "I'd like that," I said. As we locked up and headed home, I caught my reflection in the bakery window. There I was, Margaret Walker, business owner, mentor, mother, wife. No longer invisible, no longer silent, no longer taken for granted. I thought about justice. What I'd wanted when this all began. I thought it would feel like revenge, like watching them struggle as I had. Instead, it felt like growth. Painful, necessary growth for all of us. Linda was learning humility and honesty. Thomas was discovering responsibility. Sarah was finding her voice. Harold was seeing me clearly for perhaps the first time. And I was learning that it's never too late to reclaim your dignity. We'd all been broken in our own ways. Now we were healing. Together, but different. Not because I'd forced them, but because I'd finally stood firm. My phone buzzed with a text from Ruth. "Proud of you, Margaret. You changed more than just your life today." I smiled, knowing she was right. By refusing to disappear, I'd shown my children, my grandchildren, even Harold, that it's never too late to become visible. It's never too late to demand respect. It's never too late to remember who you are. And that lesson was perhaps the greatest legacy I could leave them. As I walked home under the evening sky, I thought about all the other Margarets out there. Women who had given everything to their families, only to find themselves invisible in their own homes. Women who had dreams gathering dust in the back of their minds. Women waiting for permission to become themselves again. My name is Margaret Walker. At 75, I started my business. They laughed, until they wanted jobs at my company. And you? Never let anyone tell you it's too late to find your voice.